Welcome to the new Rainmaker Podcast, a weekly show for visionary founders and team members alike to come together and share the heartfelt, the cringe, and the radically honest truths about what it's really like to build and work for some of the world's most exposed brands on the biggest internet stages. I'm your host, Veronica Romney, and after working for some of the biggest names in the online space myself, I've learned that it takes both leadership and dream team collaboration to truly scale a company to its greatest potential. You can build a business alone, but you cannot scale it on your own. And my goal on today's episode and every episode is to inspire our dreamers and empower our leaders. Make sure to follow and share my podcast with your friends and colleagues, and feel free to tag me on Instagram at vromney with your insights and ahas. Now let's make it rain on today's episode. Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast. Today we have an extremely special, lean in kind of special podcast, because we don't just have one guest. We have two guests. We have the partners from the Product Boss, Miss Jacqueline and Minna. I'm super excited to have you both to talk about something that I've been wanting to talk about forever, which is the partnership dynamic, a very unique relationship dynamic. So we're going to dive right in. Would you do me and the Rainmaker community a favor and introduce yourselves?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Jacqueline Snyder. I'm one half of the Product Boss, maybe the more Valley Girl sounding person, but I'm from the Valley, so I can be. And then I've got my Iowa Valley Girl over here.
Yep. Hey, everybody. I'm Minna. If you want to listen to our voices, this is our Valley-ish voices going forward.
That's awesome. Okay. I'm going to start this podcast with a stat that I've heard. And when I heard it, it just froze me. I don't know how else to put it. And it's interesting because I grew up with parents who've worked together for over 33 years and just retired, still as a marital couple and business partners. But the statistic I had heard in a mastermind was that 80% of partnerships do not work out. That is really high. If the divorce rate is 50 to 60, but then the business partnership divorce rate is 80%. Those that make it, it says a lot. And then not to say that the remaining 20% are the healthiest that they can be. And then there's always, it's a relationship. But I want to explore this with you. And I asked the two of you, and you were so gung-ho about it. And I just couldn't thank you enough. This is a more vulnerable conversation. So I just want to start by thanking you for being willing to shed some light on your relationship. So let's take it to the beginning. Entering it. It terrifies me. How thorough were you in your investigation of each other? Are we really going to do this? How deep did you go? Did you talk to the lawyer?
If we're talking percentages, 5%.
Yeah.
5% thorough.
5%.
No due diligence. Just enjoyed each other.
Yeah. I think, so if we want to go all the way to the back, so back. Mina and I both had partners in the past.
Okay.
That didn't actually work out. So we both have our own businesses still, and Mina's actually business partners with her husband with Little Labels, which is their product company that they sell millions of dollars on Amazon. And then when I started out, I was a fashion designer working for fashion companies as a designer working for them. But when I ended up leaving a toxic job that I was in, my neighbor who had a small business was like, hey, why don't you come work for me? And then we kind of brainstormed, and she was like, I was thinking other people need help starting fashion brands the way she was helping me because she was 10 years older than I was. And she's like, maybe we could help other people. And so we started that as kind of I was more of her subordinate, but we were partnering in it. And she was the one who eventually was like, I can't do this. And she left me with the first initial clients. Oof. And we did end poorly because I think she had she was having a second kid. She was going through marital issues. It was just personal stuff that was coming up for her. Mm-hmm. And then I think she apologized to me years later about whatever it was. So it didn't end the way I wanted it to end, but that's what kicked me off with having my own business. And then Minna, you also had your partner in the scrapbooking company you had?
Yeah, I had a business partner for this scrapbooking event that I used to do and scrapbooking clothing. So it was when it was at the height of it, and we had done it for 2 years, and it ended up just fine. We have no bad blood or anything, but it was a really big emotional breakup for me because it was one of my few female friends that I had. And other than my sisters. So I was really heartbroken. I felt, I didn't obviously voice it or anything, but I remember feeling so heartbroken because at that time she was having an affair. I had no idea, not on me, obviously her real husband, and then she left him and she moved away with her guy that she was having an affair with. But her existing husband at the time was my husband's best friend.
Oh, wow.
So it was a whole big thing of me losing what I would have called my best friend, because we did everything together. It was like the couples together. We had a business together, but she just picked this other life. And I felt betrayed in ways, because I was like, how does she not even tell me that she was having this affair? And anyways, it was a mess. Okay.
Mhm.
And things now, looking back in hindsight, I'm really glad that I got out of that partnership, because she was kind of a selfish person when I think about it, just like,
Mhm.
I understand why we didn't work out, because like she didn't see me how I saw her. Like the business was a priority, our friendship was a priority. And I think that that was really like hurtful to me. So it took me a long time to get over that, but also trying to have those emotions, feelings, while my own husband is like livid because
Mhm.
his best friend is heartbroken over their actual marriage, So I think there's a lot of different things, but what I've learned is that there's no ill will. I think that obviously there's people that come into your life, but you learn from it. And I think
Mhm.
that really helped myself and Jacqueline really understand that every relationship is work and it
Mhm.
takes two parties.
Mhm.
Like just like any other marriage, that stat changes when you actually survey people that are going through marriage counseling or that grew up and took therapy, if they grew up with divorced parents, let's say. So,
Mhm.
like, stats are just stats, But
Mhm.
I think that for myself and Jacqueline, we didn't go in like even doing any due diligence. We just really enjoyed each other. I think it's probably what attracted us to each other was that we were in the same season of life, and really our core values were in there, and we just were friends, and there was not a lot of pressure, and we just enjoyed immense
Mhm.
amount of conversations with each other. But then now that we have a team, we are going to have to work for the
Mhm.
longevity of this partnership. So we'll
Mhm.
kind of get to that. But I think that that's what that taught me, about female friendships.
Well, what's hitting me in both of your stories is the fact that you're not the first partnership. And
Mhm.
not only are you not the first partnership that either one of you had, you had bad
Yeah.
previous
Yeah.
divorces, partnership
Yeah.
divorces, and yet you guys had like a quickie in Vegas, like 5% due diligence. Is like you guys
Yeah.
kind of like
Like-
fell in love.
Actually, I'll tell you about that quickie in Vegas when you're done.
Well, but and maybe anybody who's listening that didn't know that backstory, I think that was what surprised me is like you guys, like if I date somebody at church and it goes horrifically, I'm going to tell myself I will never date somebody in the pool that I'm swimming, like you know what I mean? But you
Mhm.
guys did it again, and so I both of you, and I
Mhm.
kind of want to dive into that a little bit deeper. But tell me about your quickie.
Yeah, so I think because it kind of is. So I never really I always used to think running my other business, designer consulting co-op, like if I was a designer and I was like if I had a business partner, maybe this business would be better. So having my own business, I wasn't looking for a partner. I had partnerships, I had collaborations. But I thought if I found a partner to subsidize for a part that I felt weaker in,
Sure.
maybe that would help my business succeed. And I never did it. I didn't really want people to tell me what to do. I didn't want to run my ideas by other people because it was a business I started from the ground up. I didn't really want to give up that creative side of me or visioning side. And so I think the way that Mina and I came together, so it is a little bit like this, is we met through a podcast Facebook group.
Mhm.
I had heard her mentioned on the podcast that it was that Mina has a Amazon business, and if she ever wanted a coach on Amazon, she could be a coach. And my ears pinged because I was closing out an accessories brand that I had, and I was like, "Oh, maybe I could liquidate on Amazon. Let me get a hold of this woman." So I found her on Facebook, and she offered to hop on a chat with me. And she's like, she's talked to so many other people in video chats. I always say I got the final rose because she stayed with me.
I think everybody at that time was like, "Can I pick your brain? Do you want to do a coffee chat?" Remember when coffee chats were all the rage a few years?
And you said yes to everything. And so then we took it off Facebook and we moved it over to Voxer,
Mm.
and we just started chatting back and forth to the point that we'd never talked on the phone, and we would leave each other 15-minute messages. And we know that Voxer cuts off at 15 minutes if nobody's made it that far because it'd cut it and then she'd leave a 15-minute message. So I think it was like the beginning of becoming podcasters because the
Yeah.
first time we started talking was so weird because we would talk over each other.
Talking on the phone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we didn't know how to talk and wait for the other person. So it really started where I was doing something for my own business and I was putting together a presentation at the LA Textile Show. I would teach designers every time they had the show. And they asked me to put together a panel. And so because Minna was now my new business friend, I had no business friends. I had no entrepreneurial women friends that were doing what I did. All my friends worked for people. And so I love that I had her, and we kind of would go back and forth. And we were coming up with this idea of like, what could this panel be about? And we got to the idea of multi-stream machine, which is actually our course now. But it was this idea of product businesses succeeding by having multiple streams of income on different sales platforms. So that's funny that it, like our first idea together ended up being the thing that grew us. So then I was also learning that you're supposed to sell from a stage, and I'd never sold from a stage before. And I'm talking to Mina, I'm like, do you think we should, because we were in other masterminds, and I was like, do you think we should like sell a mastermind from the stage? That's what people do. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. And so we actually didn't intend to become partners. We're high quick starts.
Yeah. And my background is in graphic design. I put together a flyer, literally an old school printed out flyer
with like green dollar bills all over
and
it.
then we said, meet us out in the hallway if you're interested.
I like it.
I think when you say like that was a quickie, and I remember my brother, I was with him, and he's like, I was like, yeah, I met this one online. She's coming in. We're going to get an Airbnb together, and then we're going to present. And then we're thinking of maybe starting a company. And he goes, hold on a second. He was afraid I was being catfished.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've seen her online.
Yeah.
So it is a little bit of that quickie where we kind of jumped in without realizing that we were actually starting something that would grow to where we are now. So I think that's the other side. We weren't looking to supplement, hey, we need a partner. We have this idea. We just really collaborated really well. And then it grew from that.
So it started with that panel and started with that. Was it 3 months? It was only a 3-month mastermind. Yeah. And then we started the podcast. So it wasn't that we started a business from the get-go. It was, the mastermind.
It was like a fun hobby. It was something we just had fun doing.
For 3 months, which was like so exciting because we were helping all these people, and we naturally love to tell people what to do. Obviously that helped in our backgrounds. And then the podcast came about, and then we just had fun just having conversations that we would have anyways, but we put them on air. And so that's where it started, like January of 2018.
Gosh, honestly, it reminds me of my first year of marriage. I got married, but I didn't change my name legally for a year. I don't, and my husband's like, why? I'm like, because you never know. But I just
same over here, by the way.
Yeah.
Until I had kids.
Hey man. Yeah. But like the fact that a joint offer that was validated by the marketplace, it kind of like blessed the marriage in some ways. And then your podcast and then your personalities were kind of blessed by the marketplace. And so, and then what, you made it legal on paper like after all of that. Yeah, that's really interesting that you like co-branded before you even actually had like an LLC document.
But we had, when you say co-branding, we had no audiences. We literally were people that had 0 email lists, started from nothing, had no audience, didn't even have an Instagram. And we just put our conversation on air because we both enjoyed podcasts.
And I think when you ask, like, because you're saying this now, you're like, well, we had to marry our families. That's something that we didn't think about. But because we became close friends and we knew our values aligned, and our youngest daughters are the same age, and we care about each other as friends, that I think our spouses have only met once, right? When we drove across America, we stopped over at Mina's house. And they got along really well, but we will probably never vacation together with our families, because it's like we kind of, and the other joke is we used to say that like I was like, yeah, it's like Mina and I meet at hotels across the country, and like I'm having an affair with her, but the affair is business because I love business so much.
Yeah. Actually, the money that would fund when we first started was us going to conferences together. So it wasn't like we needed that money. It was our reward was getting to see each other, but also be around like these other people. And it just steadily grew from there, like the connections and everything.
So let's talk about, I'm so curious, and I've gotten a taste of your personalities here and there because you guys are inside the Rainmaker residency, and I also work with Lauren, but who's the driver in this dynamic? Like, who was the one like that saw the potential? Even like to your point, it's not like you had like millions of people listening to your podcast like you do today. But who was the one between the two that was like, let's kick this from hobby zone to like legit zone? Like, who was the one that was going to drive that? I'm curious.
I think it just kind of happened. I would say, if anything, Jacqueline definitely was like, hey, we should start a podcast, but I was the one who executed everything. So it was like conversations that happened. We didn't become a legit business till 2 years in. I think.
Mhm.
Wasn't it, Jacqueline? That was when we were like, we don't want to get taken away by the tax people because we are now having to claim this money that we're making.
Yeah, we started making money. We made like
Yeah.
6 figures in our first year. I think I'm more of the nudge to Mina
Okay.
sometimes, where I push her a little bit into discomfort
Mhm.
and then she jumps right on and says yes. Because what's interesting is like Mina was raised to not use her voice, not to be heard, like from a very traditional Asian family. And so I've said to her, especially when we started hitting such success with the podcast, it's like, can you believe that you're so successful using your voice?
Hmm. I mean, it's
You know?
crazy. I think the podcast has done so much because I love podcasts so much because it helped me find my voice. But I think
Yeah.
that I might have had a podcast because it's more behind the scenes, but Jacqueline and I, we've been on stages, we've talked in front of so many people, just everything. And a lot of times it's a bounce back. So like I'll
Yes.
see her do it and she'll start off because that's the part where I trip up is the beginning usually. And then I can kind of get in the flow and it's like very easy for me to like be a part of the conversation and just jump right in. But I think that the beginning part of finding my words or finding my voice within that thing always started with Jacqueline. So when we would get on stages, definitely she would start off and I would bounce off of her, and it was a real dynamic, and I think that's what people enjoyed about it was that we thoroughly enjoyed
Mhm.
that dynamic together, but they got to be a fly on the wall
For
in a
sure.
lot of ways of, we're actually talking about stuff that
Mhm.
it's incredible to see because shorthand wise, there's no women talking about these product businesses, how to make money, how to be moms to the hard stuff and the easy stuff. And we just have like fun
Mhm.
conversations around it. But we never had seen it done before. People having those conversations and
Hmm.
inviting other people in.
But I want to add, I told Mina this recently because in that talking about partnership, and now that we do have so much hanging on the product boss and a
Yeah, it's
big
more
team
pressure.
and a lot, right?
It is a
Because
lot.
the product boss used to be just Fridays for us, and our businesses were the other days, and now our businesses were like, wait, oh yeah, we have another business. Oh, we have to do, But
Mhm.
no, I'm kidding about that. But the thing that I told Mina was I very much have really big ideas, and I always had. Like I've come up with so many fashion lines in my head that I will never actually make, apps I've
Mhm.
created that I will never actually make. So while maybe sometimes I jump to these big ideas, the beauty of our relationship is Mina also can vision. She's a visionary. She can also see that. But then her brain works in a way of how do we execute it?
Mhm.
So none of this would ever happen. Maybe I'm the nudge, but then she's the one that's like she said, like I could have said, sure, let's do a podcast, but you would have never heard it. It would have never been posted,
Yep. Yep.
you know?
Well, the reason that I ask who nudged who, one of my favorite questions to ask people, like friends in social circles, I just did this last night. I was hanging out with a group of women, and I love asking the question of like, especially if they've been married for a long time, like who hit on who first? Because it's
Mm.
so reflective of the relationship 25 years down the line. So like I approached my husband. We were in a dirty club. He's wearing a white Kirkland t-shirt from Costco with black lights. So he's like glowing, and he's also just extremely fair skinned to begin with. So he's like really glowing. And I approached him, was like, why aren't you dancing? And now we've been married 13 years. And when I tell people that story, like, well, that makes a lot of sense. Right? So that's why I asked the question, like early on in this partnership, like who was the nudger? Who was the one that hit on who and approached who? And then now fast forward, you guys have had a success, I mean, crazy successful run already. Like, is that still reflective of your nature today, what it was organically back then? And if it is, how have you either supported that, embrace that, or how have you had to like put boundaries around it potentially as well?
It's been scarier for sure
Okay.
because of the amount of pressure. We have life insurance on each other now. We have, different conversations we never had to worry about. So having those worries, like I was just worrying last night, and it's like worries that, there were different worries before, but now it's like we have a team and
Mm-hmm.
all these different things. And like I said, and it's like the questions of, and wealth managers and the questions of what are you going to do when you retire? And it's like, you know, when we got into it, it didn't feel like as much pressure, like what Jacqueline was saying. And now it feels like every decision feels like an eternity that we have to make a decision for. But not only that, it not only involves Jacqueline's entire family, my entire family,
Yeah.
but the mouths on our teams
Right.
that we're feeding. So it feels like a lot, when we put that all in there. And I just think that it just takes more work. Both of us, we're lucky that we have common values in a lot of ways, because even we started doing alignment counseling, and like there's so much I'm discovering about Jacqueline. I think she can say the same. And I'm just like, thank God we come from a lot of the same places, because I could not picture my life to the end with somebody if they didn't ever understand where I was coming from, because I have such a small, tight-knit group of people that I'm ride or die with. And like, if she couldn't understand it, I remember I had this one friend that when I was going through the death of my grandma, she never had grandparents at all. Like, she grew up with no grandparents, and she couldn't understand at all what I was going through.
Right.
Because she never felt it, like, law of exposure or whatever. And it put this really big divide between us, because my identity was so far in that, and she couldn't understand it. And she was like one of my best college friends. And from there, I remember specifically being like, oh my gosh, she can't even fathom who I am as a person, So I think that as we're going through alignment counseling, I always I've been trying to do it through like a gratitude lens too, of being like, thank God that Jacqueline has trauma like me. I know, like, she's probably not thinking that, but it's true.
Come on. So we were working with Dr. Sharon Spano. That is part of the Rainmaker. And then have you done a constellation with her?
Yeah. Well, actually, my husband's also doing the same kind of.
Well, this is going to be a really funny story.
Yep.
So let me just tell you a really quick story. We are doing our constellations together, which is, if any of you are in the Rainmaker, you know what we're talking about it, but it's this really interesting thing where it's almost like this virtual game board and you're placing things on it.
That are like your inner child traumatic, okay?
Yeah. So we did one where you have to place yourself on the board, and then it's like we had to put money, time, and our career or business. And you place it next to you, and then she has you place your mom and your dad, and then somebody else, right? So Minna places her parents like in front of her, facing away, because they're living their life. This is what she keeps saying.
Kind of like on the edge. And I kept saying that, oh, my dad's living his life. My mom's living her life.
They're just living their life over there.
And
then I place mine, and like my mom's next to me because I kind of support her. And then my dad's not in my life, so he's like off the board. And then, business and all this stuff is around me. So I talked to my husband about his, and I was like, did she? So he tells me he does it. And he's like, did she have you turn your parents around to look at you and talk to you? And he goes, what do you mean? They're already looking at me. I was like, what? And he's like, why wouldn't they be looking at me?
Wow.
And I was like, why would they be looking at you?
Why would they be?
And I told Minna, and Mina's like, this is blowing my mind.
It made me so uncomfortable.
Yeah,
and they were next to him on both. So he separated them to be next to him on either side,
flanking him on either side.
Yeah.
Our parents were like off in some other world, so we were just like, oh, we get each other. We're both from like a big family of a bunch of kids, and I'm the oldest. Minna operated very much like the oldest in her family, and and we're both very close to our grandma. So really interesting. But to go back to your question, I think as the business grows and there's more pressure on the business, and both of us are very similar in a lot of ways, but we also have different versions of scarcity. My scarcity leans to money, Mina's is to time.
And versions of stress response. That's what I'm realizing.
Yeah. So now that the business really, is paying life insurance for us on each other and paying for our houses and college kids, and teams and because when we started this, it was like a nice to have, like Minna said, it got us on trips. Now it's like, not only does it support the life we've built, but the future life we want, because we both have big ideas for what we want to do for our families, that the pressure there, but we respond both differently to money, and we both respond differently to time. And so this is something we're working on with Dr. Sharon Spano, but where it is like, now my big ideas annoy the heck out of Minna, probably. And her working it out and seeing if it's possible or not possible annoys the heck out of me.
Us pushing holes into each other's ideas now feels different, because we're doing the ideas from a stress standpoint. And so Jacqueline definitely has different responses to stress than I have different responses to stress. And the decisions are simply bigger. So
Yeah.
like our decision making responses are different, because before, when we were making decisions, I used to like really pride myself on being a quick decision maker, but it wasn't like life or death. I feel like
Yep.
in these cases it feels so gigantic.
So, side note, the Rainmaker Society may save our marriage because
Yeah. Yes. And that's what we're learning, is it's like a very much like a marriage, and we're willing to put the work in, and we both really highly value therapy and self-development. So that has really helped.
I was just going to bring this up. So, a couple thoughts that I have. Yes, Dr. Sharon Spano is a godsend. She is the executive alignment coach within the Rainmaker residency, and she is particularly served and saved for just the CEOs. And you guys have it. Yes, you're one of the few partnerships in the program, so it's like actually a joy to like watch you guys do this. And she never divulges anything personal, but she'll say things like, "No, they're super similar, but their responses are opposite." So like I get that will be like just a general overview that I'll get. And that helps informs me to serve both of you and obviously your team with who I'm serving inside the Rainmaker residency. But the one thing that I wanted to loop back to is when you're like, the stakes are higher. Because right, when it's like a fun thing, if somebody doesn't show up to the call or shows up to the call 5 or 10 minutes later, it's a fun thing. When everything's riding on it and the stakes are higher and your partner doesn't show up to a call or is late for a call, or in my case, the one thing that like I'll never forget this, because my husband and I did an agency together. We went to a business meeting, like a sales appointment, and he didn't bring his business cards, and I thought I was going to throw him out of the car. Like I wanted to murder him, right? But and so like I remember when we were first married before kids, if he wanted to go out or he wanted to go to the gym for 90 minutes, I didn't care. Then I have kids. I'm like, you're going to the gym for 90 minutes. You're leaving me with the baby? No. Like, right? Like, it's amazing how the relationship changes when the stakes increase. The stakes are higher, both in a personal dynamic, but certainly in a professional dynamic. The things that were like no consequence now has all consequence. And so you guys are still yourselves, but to your point, everything is magnified because there's so much more to be lost. And then you guys look at each other with, that lens that you didn't used to have. It used to be pink and now it might be gray.
Well, we have babies now, like our team members. So it's
Right.
like, before it was like we got to have conversations, have fun, no pressure, enjoy each other. Now it's like,
Yeah.
we have kids to feed or
Right.
whatever, or
Right.
kids to lead, or, like you said, it feels more magnified for
Yeah.
sure. And then, but the most magnified part of it is like what it will be in the future. Like that's the hard part. It's like before, maybe it's like ignorance is bliss, and you're just like thinking, oh, who knows what will happen will happen. Now we're like, for God's sake, we need to make this happen.
Do you know what's interesting though? This is off topic, but also extremely relevant. So in 2022, this is when we're recording this, by the way, I invested in a parenting coach because in all the arenas, I felt like I was killing it and not in my parenting. And so I invested in a parenting coach for the first time. And I just felt like the stakes were so high. If I screw up my 8-year-old, he's going to be a narcissistic prick like my brother. I was completely fear projecting, but I didn't realize it that way. I just thought I was being extremely like proactive to not have him turn out to be something that I didn't want him to be. And I felt like I had between 0 and 18 to mold this Play-Doh. And if I don't mold it correctly, can you hear the anxiety? And I remember Dr. Hope, her name is Hope. She gives me hope. So Dr. Hope, who I could recommend to anybody because she's amazing. She's going to be on the podcast one day. I said to her, or she said to me, she's like, you are parenting from a place of fear projection. She's like, you could do everything right now and he could still turn out to be a narcissistic asshole. Like, you really can't stop. Like, that's not how this works. And the more that you parent from a place of fear and then you're projecting the fear, the more self-fulfilling prophecy this becomes, because he will only live up to what he thinks you want him to be or that you already think him to be. And I was like,
yeah.
And that's hard because, especially now, let's go back to the partnership part, because I'm talking about my parenting. When I work with visionary CEOs, the worst thing you can do to like a Walt Disney is to fear project, because they think in Disney World, they think in color, they think in possibilities. And yet, if there's not the realist by their side, which was the Roy Disney, they would have been bankrupt too. So how do you hold space where you don't have an umbrella to the brainstorm, but at the same time you don't bankroll or bankrupt your company. Like there's that, it's that really delicate balance between holding space for each other's awesomeness and colors, but then also being the realist. How have you guys found that, or continue to try to find that between each other when the stakes increase?
I think that's where we're at. So this has
Okay.
probably been one of the hardest years for us relationship wise. And I was just talking about this to my husband last night. I was like, what do we expect? The world is dealing with trauma,
For
right?
sure.
Like the level of stress that people have been under. And then as thought leaders with community, especially we work with product-based business owners in 2020, while everybody else was making sourdough, we were building a survival kit course for our product people, because we're like, how do we get them online if their stores are shut down? Like, how do we save these people's lives in the way of not health perspective, but like financially? People were getting laid off or they weren't able to work and they were pouring candles in our basement. So there's this level of pressure and stress we've been under. And I think where we're coming to now is the conversation is, for Minna, it's a little bit like, when do we get to pull back? When are we not constantly feeling like we're putting out fires for other people? And for me, we did this Harrison test yesterday.
The Harrison assessment.
Oh, no. Was it the Harrison or was it another one?
No, it's Berkman.
Berkman.
It was Berkman.
Okay, Berkman's really interesting. We also did the Harrison, which is also amazing. And Berkman was like, I operate at a high capacity. Like I actually like the speed, right? So I think what we're doing with all these tests, with these alignment coaches, with all the things, because you're saying the Roy Disney and the Walt Disney, we're both very much Walt Disney. I will say that I believe Minna tends to be the Roy Disney in a lot of ways with the how to get things done. I think for me, where we've been coming up to conflict is my Roy Disney is like when it comes to finances, because of my own background with that. And we had this other defining conversation yesterday where it was like, when we talk about money, we're looking at P&Ls versus cash flow and how those two things are also very different. So same exact thing that you said, Dr. Sharon Spana said, was like, we're saying the same thing. We're just coming at it from two different lenses.
Right.
And I think the more we get clarity around how we're both seeing it, it's having compassion for the other. And I think we've always had this from a personal level, but now that their stakes are higher, it's learning to have compassion for each other, for the other person, saying, oh, because I understand her trauma, her history, the way she sees things, or what her pressures are right now in her life, to have more grace and more compassion for it, that it's not butting heads, but it's like, oh, she sees it this way. We need to reapproach. Like, how do we speak the same language that the other person can understand? So I think that's where we're at now. It's like, we both are that in a lot of different ways for each other, but we both value our families. We both love to work and create. We both want to make a lot of money. And then the other stuff just needs to be figured out as we get there.
I think it's hard, because with the business is bigger now. It's huge. And it's like now, and the world has been so hard.
Right.
So it's like taking on those responsibilities in 2020 and 2021. And I've hit burnout before. It was the reason why I started a product business to begin with.
Sure.
And so I didn't, and then I hit burnout again, And so coming up from that, breathing air, feeling like I actually have been 2 years, these last couple of years have been so hard. It wasn't just this year, it was the year before that too, because just remember that was 2020. And it was like, I committed myself to making the most videos I've ever done, creating these courses, the slides, everything. So it was a lot of output. And so for me, I'm like, I literally have been so drained, and having like the responsibility, which for me, I feel that responsibility to all these people, but I actually have to take care of myself and my family first. So there has been a lot of things in my own personal development, my own perspective, and like the things I've been trying to get back to is just to get back to myself and my boundaries and what I need, which has been harder because I'm not great at voicing that. But it's been more helpful because we have the resources, like even personally, like I went back to therapy, even taking care of my health,
Sure.
I was just in like the sauna this morning and going through my old exercises that I used to do to prevent anxiety attacks, whereas I just got lost in all of it.
Yep.
And I think that holding space for each other, because, Jacqueline, she works with a life coach. She has her own self-development and things
And
like that.
tools, yeah.
And I think that we have to respect too that our relationship will change too. So I think that marriages sometimes don't work out because people expect people to be the same person they always were, but they're not.
Nailed
10
it.
years later, they're not the same person.
Right.
Life has changed them,
Right.
And so I think with me, myself and Jacqueline, we have grown in leaps and freaking bounds. Like, I don't know how much personal development I've done. It's enough to explode somebody's brain, you know? And Jacqueline too. And we've done it in this like silo, and we went through a pandemic, and we have our own trauma to deal with. So I think that that's what I'm really trying to remember in this, is that hold space for each other, but our relationship is going to look different. We don't need to go back to that, space where it was like fun. It looks different now. There's more pressure. We have to figure out how to deal with that now, and it will be fine.
Okay. Let me speak to this because this is like, oh my gosh. I had a dinner conversation a couple of weeks ago. If anybody that's listening has ever read the book, The Big Leap, Upper Limit Problems, so people have enormous success and they self-sabotage because there's a lot of things that we tell ourselves. So if I have too much money, then my family won't love me because I'm in a stratosphere away from them. I'm not in their circle anymore, kind of thing, right? So I have this belief, this limiting thought: if I make too much money, or my husband makes too much money, or we collectively make too much money, the marriage will fail, because I have so much empirical evidence of the wealthiest of wealthy couples or the most successful entrepreneurs I've ever had close proximity to, that at some point there's a tipping point and the family combust. And it scares the crap out of me. Name it. Bill Gates got divorced. Rachel Hollis got divorced. Like, I could throw 5,000 examples. They're everywhere. And so I have this belief, like, I want uber success too, and I want to impact as many people as possible. But to like, where's that line? Where's the threshold? And then I don't want to jump over that line because I don't want to implode my own family. So I had this. I was talking about this at dinner with a therapist, and I'm like, who specializes in marriage and high performing couples and things like that. And she's like, you want to know the number one secret, or the number one factor as to whether or not a couple will actually stay together? It has nothing to do with whether or not both individuals go through personal growth. Like, one guy's all about Tony Robbins and the other one's not. It's not that. It's whether or not individually they allow capacity for change. If there's no capacity for change, there is no relationship. So it doesn't matter if one outpaces the other in change. So one person really gets into personal development and the other person has nothing to do with it. That actually doesn't determine it. It's whether or not they allow individually, they have capacity for the other person to change, is whether or not they'll stay together. And I think that could be applicable for any relationship that means something to you. And that like really hit me because I'm like, well, thank God me and my husband both have capacity for each other's change. I mean, we got married at 22. We grow up together, right? But the other thing that I wanted to bring up that you said that really resonated with me, so thank you. I literally looked at if I could turn the camera, I have a little Post-it on my door before I walk out of my office every day to be the mom and the wife and all the other things that I have to do. And it says, lead with compassionate curiosity. I feel like my number one goal in life at this moment that will serve me the rest of my life. There's lots of things, slow to anger and this and that, but for me, if I can choose to lead with compassionate curiosity in every arena of my life, as a team leader, as a wife, as a mother, if I can lead with compassionate curiosity, I really genuinely feel like it will serve me the rest of my life and everything that I do that means something to me, because it assumes the best in the other person every time. We'll be back with this interview right after the commercial break. Did you know that I have a free Rainmaker hiring kit? Skip the formal recruiting process and learn how to source Rainmaker applicants that are already connected to you. I'll show you how to turn a walking testimonial into a rockstar team member for free. Head to veronicarami.com or click the link in my show notes to get your hands on the free Rainmaker hiring kit. Now let's get back to the show.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I mean, I think that's something that it might have been Dr. Savannah that said the same thing, but she was like, ask with a curiosity, like, what do you need right now? Or like, tell me, and I said this to my sister actually this morning. I used it on her because we learned this yesterday. Minna and my sister's been avoiding my calls. We're trying to plan a family trip. There's a whole child dynamic happening there.
She's the baby, by the way.
She's the baby.
She's deferring decisions.
And it's
all the things.
All of it. So many things. So I actually said this to her. I was like, are you okay? What's wrong? I don't want to talk about it. She's like, I don't want to talk about it because she's different than me. I was like, She's like, I don't need you to solve my problems. And I was like,
Mm.
okay. Okay. Would you like me to just listen to you when you're ready? If you want to vent, I'm here to listen and not fix. Cause I'm the oldest. I'm
Oh,
like the
I get
mom.
it.
I'm like, how do I fix it for you? You know? So I was like, oh, look at me being all grown up and saying like, I'll just listen and have to bite my tongue every time I want to tell her what to do. Right. So I think that's it. It's like, what do you need? How can I help you right now? People, what we learned yesterday is that I actually want people to fix my problems. Like if I'm good to listen, but I want people to fix it for me. And Mina really needs people to listen and not offer to
I'm the
fix.
same. Yeah.
So I think the more we, like you said, are curious
Hmm.
into the other person versus being defensive
Hmm. Hmm.
or pissed or like, what's the word, oppositional.
Yeah. Here we go again. Yep.
Yeah. And curious, like, why, how are you feeling about this? Or what can I do? Or what do you need right now? And like asking with a question. And I agree with my kids, it's like, do you just need a hug right now? Do you want me to sit with you? Do you want a hug or do you want to be left alone? And not like feeling rejected by my kids or annoyed that they're feeling a certain way. They're humans, right? We've all felt this way. So I think that when you ask about the success of a relationship, whether it's marriage, whether it's partnerships, whatever it is, it's a knowing that we're all individual humans in relation with each other.
Right.
And we're all going through our own life experience. And how can we be there to allow each person to go through it, even though it does impact us? My husband's annoying the crap out of me
Hmm.
recently, and my business partner was, and I was like annoyed by everybody. And it was
Hmm.
like, is it me? Is it them? And it's like, okay,
Hmm.
got to pull back a little and just kind of be curious. And then each of us were going through our own thing and it was just bumping up against each other. So it's hard to say because when people are in emotion or like under stress, it's hard to pull back.
100.
And sometimes your body forces you to stop.
Yeah.
Mina went into burnout. I just am getting over COVID. Like I was on my butt. Like I couldn't do anything. So it's like it just wasn't a reset. And I think if any of you are feeling like at capacity, find a way to reset that your body doesn't force you to shut down.
Yeah. It doesn't take a
Yeah.
hospital
Yeah.
situation for you to stop, right?
Yeah.
Mm. Can I share the one question so this is my favorite question to ask that triggers the compassionate curiosity that I hope to lead and seek to lead with. And the question I ask of a team member, a spouse, a friend, a kid is like, what's coming up for you right now? Because there's the conversation we're having, and then there's actually the real conversation that's being taken, like that's happening, that's like not being communicated. And so the question I normally ask is like, when I my spidey sense, you can, especially a female, we're very intuitive. We can read the room. Even if I can't see you, I can feel it. And so, like, what's coming up for you right now, it automatically triggers my compassionate curiosity because I can feel it. Because what happens is if I label it, if I tell my husband, like, why are you being so prickly? Or like, why are you so, all he can do is like, I'm not being that thing. And then all we're doing is
Mm-hmm.
arguing about language. Don't call me mad. Don't
Mm-hmm.
call me anxietist. Don't. And then all we're focusing on is on the right vocabulary word. And that's not the point. So, like, what's coming up
Yeah.
for you right now? So that's what I was going to share.
Yeah, I think that, being someone who doesn't vocalize very much, and, according to that Berkman assessment, I show up as a listener and Jacqueline shows up as a listener, but a lot like that question is more seek to understand versus seek to fix. So while like mine was a 99 or something crazy on wanting to be heard.
Mm.
And so it wasn't wanting to be fixed, it was wanting to be
Mm.
listened to, genuinely listened to. And I think that I get the curiosity, but her example that she gave was that sometimes women walk around. There's this thing with like a woman with a nail in her head. And she
That
kept
video.
saying, I have a headache. I have a headache. And everybody kept saying, take that nail out of your head, and wasn't listening to her. But really, she just wanted to say, I have a headache. I feel terrible. I think there's a nail in my head, that sort of thing. And somebody being like genuinely listening to her, like, okay, yes, instead of seeking to fix, it's more seeking to understand.
Right.
Like if somebody were to ask me what's coming up, sometimes it's hard for me to decipher or to communicate what is actually coming up because I've never had to vocalize it in my
Sure.
life aside from in therapy with
Mhm.
my husband
Mhm.
or with myself,
Mhm.
right? And so that's like I kept saying to my husband, I was like, I think I'm going through like a midlife crisis when I was going through burnout. But, I'm just at the age too. And I was like, do you think it's midlife crisis? But I think it was just that it was this different version of me that is a stress response to everything versus how I want to show up in the world. And so I knew I have to do something about it because I can't, my body, my mind, it's all reacting in this way because I'm stressed out.
Right.
So I think that response is a choice. And if I can choose it and I can do things about it, that's kind of the journey I'm on right now. But it takes like Jacqueline being alongside of me too, because the business is such a huge thing in our life that it's like part of our brains, part of our bodies, It's like a lot. Okay. We've been going through a lot this year and the last year. And I think that the whole world collectively
Oh,
has.
for sure.
And my hope for everybody is that they take a minute to think about what type of support they need and process that trauma,
Yeah.
because that's the only way they're going to heal. And think that I feel like I'm on a healing journey now versus we can save the business journey.
Yeah, but I will say the one thing that you've both repeatedly, individually and collectively have said from the moment that you guys thought about doing something together, and now fast forward, even when the stakes are so much higher, the word is values, 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 values. It just, even despite your differences, despite your different personality assessment scores or blah, 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 despite any of the differences that you and I would have a mile long individually to have, right? If we compared and contrast, the one thing that both of you keep going back to, if you were to write a book about how to preserve a partnership, it's values, values, values. Even if they're executed differently, they're still common values, which is fascinating to me. And I think such a good advice for anybody who's listening, who would be considering a partnership or might be in a partnership and it's just not its thriving stage like maybe it used to be, and not as much fun, and might be like what you were saying, in the surviving stage.
It's just as much fun. There's just more added pressure.
For sure.
It's fun when we're together.
Yeah, it's fun
More
when we're
hotel
together.
rooms.
It's actually
Yeah.
so much fun.
We got a wink there.
Our lives are so expansive now. So while there's hard things in the partnership, there's things that I get to experience with Jacqueline I never imagined in my life.
For sure.
And I think that, then it changes the both of us and it leaves an imprint on both of us and changes us for the future. And then we have to realign to make sure we're having those conversations. And, we expand in different ways too. Like her reaction is obviously opposite than my reaction a lot of times, or approaches or whatever. But it's because we're so different. Like we're wired differently, but in response, our responses are always different.
Yeah.
But I would say how we're wired, and how we grew up is luckily very similar. Like what's important to us is very similar.
Amazing.
And I think that's what you're saying, and about being, I think that's what everyone can take away too. And even if we think about our relationships, going back to my husband and his parents flanking him and staring at him, so uncomfortable.
And just being like, bravo.
He's like, why wouldn't they look at you? I was like, why would they? Like, even still, Minna and I, our parents don't even know we have a podcast. So, no, but I think that's it too. Like, yes, it's values, but I think because we started as friends, and as friends, we were in the boat with having little kids and having our business and all this stuff. Now, what we are coming up against now is that what we say our values are actually our approach is different.
Right.
So this is something we're going to work on, is if both of us have family as a number one value, but it's a little different. We both include our bigger family, but when it comes to, let's say, our kids and our husbands, we have different approaches to our parenting styles and our guilt styles and stuff like that. So it's these are those stressors. And it always goes back to that movie with Jennifer Aniston, The Divorce, I think it was called.
The Breakup with Vince Vaughn.
Yeah. And she's like, I just want you to want to do the dishes. And he's like, nobody wants to do the dishes. And I'm like, that's sort of how it is. I think a lot of time in relationship, it's like, I want my husband to keep the house clean. He doesn't even want to he doesn't want to clean the house. And he could live like that forever. And it pisses me off. So it's like, well, then I have to do the work for myself to be okay with either him. If I'm going to give him that responsibility, then it's how he does it, or I'm going to pay for someone to come help 100%. Me because I'm lucky. Right. So I think it's starting. I think the biggest deal here in relationship is being accountable for yourself and working on yourself and understanding, and that curiosity can even come back to yourself and say, why am I feeling like this right now? You know, like if it's hard for Mina to answer that, if someone were to ask her, instead it could just be like she said, am I going through a midlife crisis? Like I cut my hair after a month.
Like, I don't even know, you know, how am I going to vocalize if I don't know?
Yeah.
Walks in with bangs.
We didn't hit our sales goal, so we get bangs and cut our hair now. So I think it's that curiosity internally and and growth internally, and then coming back to each other and realigning and realigning and realigning. And that's why I think, you know, Mina's said to me many times, like, we're going to be together till we die. Like, cause I'm always afraid she's going to leave me.
I will tell you, this is something that comes up conflict me internally that I haven't vocalized. So get ready for it, Jacqueline.
Oh no, this is deep.
Is that, and it was something that was a rub for myself and my husband too. So one of the things that would always happen that we would get in fights over is that I would always say, but we're supposed to be doing this, or it's supposed to be like that. We're not supposed to be fighting. We're never supposed to go to bed and be angry at each other, or we're supposed to be going on date nights at least once a month and having sex this many times a week, you know, and all these like supposed to's of all these things that people would influence into me, and I would just, you know, vomit onto him. And I think that that's hard for me because I tend, you know, in that case, I literally just got over it. You know, as I got older, I cared less what people thought about it. But lately, when we've been in conflict, a lot, like Jacqueline just said yesterday, she's like, somebody said they think that we're not going to make it, or we're not supposed to be fighting. And that for me, I think is, you know, a hard thing, because in any partnership, I think there's a sanctity to it.
100%.
You know, like I think, you know, like I don't care what other people say. I will literally bury myself in your coffin if I need to. You know, like they don't know how crazy I am. You know,
I
like
love
that's
that.
what I mean.
Let's
like, you know,
like, I'm here for it.
Like
now we got a double headstone.
You know, like I think that people have their opinions about people's lives, and you even have it, you get influence and you compare, and you're like, but you know, their partnership is like this. So even when people are listening to this, our partnership is a certain way that might not work for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know,
I always tell Mina, because someone's like, you know, she could have been crazy. And I'm like, I am crazy. You could just deal with my version. Right. So,
we're all crazy.
she's like, maybe not so much these days. No, but yeah. And I think that's true too with like, I'm just going to say, like, if you're in a marriage and someone's like, oh, they cheated on you, then you get a divorce. I know this is like, but there are different, we've seen other relationships. Well, one, we don't know everybody's relationships.
Correct.
Yeah, we don't.
Two, like we know nothing about people. We assume things, right? So it's like, I think every relationship and every couple needs to see what's best for them. Here's the difference. I have a friend that I don't love her husband because he doesn't want to do any work on their relationship at all. She says there's issues. We've got issues. He does not care. He's got his own thing. I think when somebody, and this, my parents ended up getting divorced after 30 years, and my dad would have never changed, never wanted to change, none of it. I think the fact that Mina and I are in long relationships that have had their ups and downs, and a relationship with each other, and we even prove that with like our relationships with our partners, which our first partners, where they had personal issues that broke up the business. Now, Mina and I have gone through a lot of personal issues, but it hasn't broken up the business. We've leaned into each other. So I think that if like exactly what Mina said, it doesn't matter what you think you're supposed to do. Right. Nobody's living in your shoes in your situation. Yeah. But as long as both people or whoever's involved are willing to work on it and change, the second we stop working on it, that's when it's going to end.
Yeah.
You know,
and having this expectation, I think too, of the other person. Like, it's supposed to be this way. You know, in marriage, this is the best thing I learned from marriage counseling. It was this: you don't know what's happening in anybody's marriage, not even yourself. Even you in that marriage, you don't even know what's happening, you know? So how are other people knowing?
I don't know if you mind me saying this. We can cut it out if you do. But I remember when you guys were first kind of sussing me out, like, do we want to have this person in our life? Do we want her to speak into our world? And one of the very, 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 and this was Mina too, I think, who said it, right, was like, hey, our partnership is off limits. Do you remember this?
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
Yep. There was a moment that you were just like, I just want to be, and I don't know if I necessarily triggered it by anything I said, but you were like, we've had coaches speak into us in the past, XYZ, but I just want you to know that like this word sanctity is perfect, but like our relationship it is safe and we will keep it safe. And if we work with somebody who wants to take us apart or cause more contention between us, we're not here for this. It's not even up for, like, you don't get to speak into that.
Mm.
And I was like, yes, ma'am.
That would be very Mina because she is the bulldog of our family. Like she
Yeah.
will protect
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And we were coming off of you know how why three children, the triangle effect. It happens every time there's an odd person out.
Yep.
And so like we've
Yep.
been with coaches where it ends up being 2 against 1.
Right.
And that's why people do say 4 kids is better than 3 kids, because there ends up being a different dynamic
Yep.
within those children, that one person is not always left out.
So everybody go have another baby if you're at 2 or
Yeah.
3. No, just kidding.
That's perfect because we're a family of 4 and we just got
Yeah.
a puppy. But no, but I remember you saying that to me, and I know, and I've always have, and I always will. Like I honor that completely, and that's why like hearing you say now months later that we've now have been working together and how much you're gaining from Dr. Sharon and from whatever. It just gives me such joy because I will never forget that moment. I immediately picked up on it from all my experiences because I've worked with lots of partners. And so I want to honor you for that because I think there's something so gorgeous, so beautiful besides you, the exterior of Mina, she's gorgeous. But like just that's so freaking awesome to see you stand up for your partner. And I just think that needed to have a moment. So just wanted you to know that.
Thank you, Mina.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Okay,
saying that.
ladies, I have kept you on for a really long time, and we are all the beneficiary of your vulnerability and your storytelling because it's not too often spoken about for fear of the shoulds that can come from this conversation. To hell with that. It's not their business. How couples look each other wounds is up to them. Let's just put it that way, right? Like I've
Yeah.
learned that how my parents handle conflict resolution is very differently than me and my spouse, and I think they're both great marriages. Call it a day. So same thing in any partnership, right? I celebrate the two of you. I think what you've achieved is incredible. I love seeing the two of you invest in yourselves individually and having the fruit of that benefit the partnership, that the partnership has served its own identity and spirit and sanctity. It's been a wonderful podcast, and I just want to thank you for being you guys.
Thank you. And I think this is like really great timing because like I said, it's been hard and we've gone through our own thing. And so not that we've graduated yet, but I think I want everyone to know that like, it did at one point, I would say that we could have gone on your podcast and said, we don't fight and everything's rosy because it really was like, but it's because the weight wasn't there, the responsibility. So I think now is a really great time because we're in healing and we're working through it. But exactly what you said, like the partnership is sanctified. It is something we treasure and we want to keep going. And so for everybody out there, like we're as much as I love Good Housewives, we're not the housewives.
Right.
We don't throw each other under the bus.
Right.
And I think that's the thing to take away too. Like as women in general in business, the best thing we can all do for each other is to support each other, not throw each other under the buses, not take from each other. She's not your competition. So she's proof it can be done is like this quote we like to say a lot, which we didn't make up, but I want you all to see us as proof it can be done and that women can fight and make up, women can be in business and go through good and hard times and all the things. So thank you for allowing us to reflect that at this point in our journey.
Yeah.
With joy.
Oh my gosh, so much. Even your reaction of me saying that, most people probably would have been like, man, she is stern or bossy or whatever, but you saw it as, oh, I love that, So I think that for all of us, sometimes we grow up and we think that woman is being a certain way, and it isn't, like we just respond to it differently. So that just shows you too, Veronica, how what you stand for too, because your reaction to that was like seeing the beauty in that versus being like, well, Mina seems a bit, steamrolly or whatever.
No, and that comes from my own personal experiences. I've worked with male partnerships. I've worked for male partnerships. I worked for very famous female partnerships. My parents have been in business partnerships, and I work with my husband in I mean, like ironically, my background is just filled with partnerships, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the very, very ugly. And so when I saw a partner stand up for her relationship, I don't know, you're like a little lighthouse in the storm in some ways. And so I was really excited to have you guys on the podcast. And I just appreciate it. I'm going to gush on you guys. I just really appreciate this conversation. I think you're going to help so many people that are probably not thriving and are hurting. And I think they need to hear this. And I probably will always reference this podcast every time I come across a partner. Honest to goodness, like, this is your homework. Go listen to this right now.
Amazing. Well, maybe we went
you.
through all this to just get here today.
We're still in it. We're still in it.
I still want people to, I mean, what you're doing is incredible. So let's pitch the business to you, because it needs to be, the Product Boss is fantastic. Where can people learn more about what you guys are doing?
Thanks. So if you are a product-based business, we offer one of like the best, easiest ways to work with us is through a year of content. It's called ayearofcontent.com, and it's content for product-based business owners. Because a lot of times, it's like, how do I do an opt-in and things like that. So we really speak to what a lot of people need, which is organic marketing.
Without sounding salesy.
Yeah, without sounding salesy. We are everywhere you listen to podcasts. So it's the Product Boss podcast. If you want to come listen, we have fun. It's like having lunch with some friends and talking business, which is our love language. You can follow us over at Instagram. And then if you want to follow us on TikTok, we're really working on building that platform, which I hate, but so someone told me I had to be there. Yeah, but come hang out with us over on Instagram. That's where we mainly are. And the podcast is always there to support you.
Well, thank you for being on today's Rainmaker podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Rainmaker podcast. We believe you can't get real results or have real relationships that last without being real first. If you resonated with today's episode, leave us a review so we can keep serving up the truth and tips that help you become the empowered leader that I know that you are. And always head over to veronicarami.com to check out all the free resources I have for you and the show notes from this episode. Until next time, my friends.